Is hear another wonderful program. I thought this morning's program was so fabulous. As the speakers know, I wasn't joking when I said you need to turn that into a TED Talk, right? I'm on it. We're going to make that happen. Wonderful program. If you want to support that, see, this is how we get things done. Obviously, we need facilities. We need someone to video it, someone to edit it. I'll be happy to help in whatever way I can, and then we're all going to push it out. So if you want to help them make that a reality, I said I want it done in 3 weeks or less. Because why? Because we are building up the momentum for this conversation. This isn't, as you know, this is not just happening here. There are op-eds that are going on around the state after these programs. This is truly building up from the ground up. Just in the last week, Flagstaff, Yuma, Tucson, more coming, Phoenix, and they will keep coming. So it's about having these important conversations so that people understand what we're really dealing with, because that's how we solve the problem. So we have some great speakers who frankly have much more impressive bios than what Ray just described of me, which is saying a lot. Our first speaker currently serves as the president of the Arizona State School Board of Education. He's also been the Yavapai County School Superintendent since July of 2005. He tells me that most of you know him, so he has so many labels after his name. I just want to highlight some that I thought were interesting. There's lots of awards and accolades, an amazing amount, truly someone with a lot of experience. But I thought it was interesting that he graduated from Tombstone High School, so down in southern Arizona. I don't know how many of you knew that. But then also taught up in the White Mountains, and then throughout the state. I know for me, when I went to this role at the town hall, which was about 11 years ago, and started traveling around the state, when you are talking to people in different communities and truly seeing those communities, you get a completely different appreciation for the true challenges and how to solve them around the state. And so how lucky you are to have someone with not only all these awards recognized on a statewide basis for his expertise and leadership, but to have him here in your community with that kind of knowledge and wisdom. And here he is to talk to you today about our issue. Please join me in welcoming your school superintendent, Tim Carter.
Thank you very much, Tara. It is my pleasure to be with you. In case you haven't been paying any attention to what's happening in the news lately, the president of the state board is rather unpopular right now. So if you would think of me for the rest of our time together as the Yavapai County School Superintendent. So it is really my pleasure to be with you. It's my pleasure to be on the same program with Dick Foreman, a longtime friend, a person I have great respect for. I really want to thank you for being here. Taking your time and energy, I think, is really important. I think we need to pat Ray on the back because his foundation helped fund this. I think he did a pretty good job of patting everybody else on the back. So Ray, thank you. So what I would like to do briefly is to talk a little bit about governance. We kind of touched around it a little bit this morning. Talk a little bit about what I see as the obligation of government, and then would like to talk a little bit about a couple of critical factors that I think are pretty important, and then hopefully we have time to take questions from you. So somebody tell me what the United States Constitution says about education. Nothing. The word education is not mentioned in the United States Constitution or any of its amendments. So having been an old-time American government teacher, I remember folks in constitutional law would then tell us that education is not a federal issue. It is reserved to the states. And that's the way it was for a long time, except for some federal land grants in the 1880s. We got into the 1900s before the federal government really realized that there were at least a couple of areas in the area of civil rights where they should be engaged. And of course that led to special education and ELL, and now it continues to lead to other things. And I haven't even talked about the Native American issue that they also are actively engaged in. So education, from our standpoint, for the most part, is a state function. All 50 states do it a little bit differently. I think we can learn a great deal about what works and what doesn't work by looking at other states. But we also then need to look at our Constitution, and you saw the Arizona Constitution, Article 11 this morning. Rosemary and her group presented that to you, and I think it was very clear what the Constitution says. It also talks about creating a general and uniform system. Now, I'm a school choice fan, but I'm going to argue that you can't have a general and uniform system and have all of the choices that we have in Arizona right now. How do we compare urban districts to rural districts? Charters, and there are various types of charters. JTEDs, accommodation districts, transporting districts, alternative programs. How do we do that and think that we're going to be fair and equitable to all those folks? So one of the good things is that in the state constitution, it outlines the 4 levels of educational authority in Arizona. The first one is the State Board of Education. And the State Board of Education doesn't trump the legislature. So when the legislature says, here's the law, our job is to create policy around that law. We can independently create law or policy if we wish to. But to be quite honest, for the last several decades, the state legislature has kept the state board quite busy just making policy around what they've told us we got to do. Then you have a state superintendent of public instruction, and I'm assuming you know that that person is elected, unlike the state board that is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And the state superintendent's job is to be the manager of all that, the administrator of all that. The state superintendent's job is to enforce the policies and the statutes of the state of Arizona. Pretty simple. Then you have the 15 county school superintendents, and our job is to help school districts and charter schools do their job. We have certain things like elections and tax rates that we have to be involved in, but for the most part, we are a service organization that helps districts and charters do whatever they need done. And again, the county school superintendents are elected. And then we have local governing boards. And local governing boards are also elected, and those are the folks that get to implement all of that stuff in their local district. So when it comes to budget, for example, the local governing board gets to cut the pie. They don't get to increase the size of the pie, they just get to cut what's given to them. All 4 of those groups, the state board, the state superintendent, the county superintendents, and the local governing boards all have statutory authority. And it's separate and it's equal. None of those 4 are the boss of any of the other 4. They all have their own powers and duties, and they have to operate within those powers and duties. Diane Douglas is not my boss, and I am not school districts and charter schools boss. That's not the way the system works. What they do is different from what the other entities do. Then there's another category that we've talked about kind of in passing, but the folks who really control the funding are the state legislature and the governor, and obviously they're elected as well. And they have the ability to direct at least the state board, and they certainly have the ability to influence those other items. So hopefully by now you have realized that the founders created a state responsibility and obligation to fund public schools in the state. It's not just the right thing to do. It's not because it's needed. They have an obligation to do it. They don't get to say no. And if they do, they're violating the Constitution of the state. So maybe we need to make sure that they understand that they have an obligation to provide funding. There's another interesting little section in the Constitution that talks about adequacy. Now, Arizona's never defined adequacy. It would be interesting if we actually chose to do that. I guess we could argue that the state legislature defines adequacy every legislative session when they set the budget. Well, folks, as you heard this morning, that trend is not going in the direction we wanted. I was raised in Southern Arizona. I graduated from Tombstone High School in 1969. I had a great high school career, and I can't ever remember a single conversation that I heard about the lack of funding. Never heard that. I'll bet you at your dinner tables, your children have heard that conversation. So I think it's pretty clear that that indeed has happened. So in 1960, we were 19th out of 50. That's pretty doggone good, actually. In 1990, we were 38th. Not where we want to be, but certainly better than where we are now. And so today we're 48th or 49th, depending on whose poll you look at. So what changed? Well, let's go back to 1990s. The school choice movement erupted. We've always had districts, we've always had homeschooling, but charters were new in the 1990s. And they have simply grown and grown. And that took the pot and split it. And then we had open enrollment that happened almost at exactly the same time. I haven't heard anybody this morning talk about open enrollment, but I know a lot of people are thinking about it. Open enrollment in my day was you went to Tombstone High School, and if you didn't go there, I'm sorry, you had to pay, your parents had to pay tuition for you to go someplace else. Well, folks, about 1990, at the same time the charter school movement began, the state legislature said, the dollar follows the student. They can go to any school they want, and they do. And so between open enrollment and the charter movement, we have taken something where all of the money used to go to basically one group, and we've now divided it into two groups, and we've made that first group extremely competitive with one another, and between groups. A child has a dollar sign right up here. That's how much money that child is worth to that district or to that charter school. That's how budgets are established, big part of it. And then we have vouchers, which, in my view, if it continues, will have the same kind of effect on our system 15 to 20 years from now as the creation of charter schools and open enrollment had. And we can argue those were really good things. And we can argue when it comes to funding, they weren't. I mean, I understand what the private school folks want to do. I'm just personally not of the opinion that you should take my public tax dollars and use it for any private purpose, not just for schools, for any private purpose. It's pretty fundamental in my view. And then we need to realize that our districts and our charters are funded very differently. So our districts basically receive their money from two different avenues in Arizona. They receive local property tax. And that local property tax goes effectively to support that school. And whatever that district is not able to raise with local property tax, the state puts money from the general fund into that pot. It's called equalization. As one goes up, the other goes down. So if a district can raise 90% of the funds, the state only has to put in 10. If the state can only raise 80 or 70%, then the state puts in 30. It's pretty simple. Charters don't work that way. All of the charter school dollars come from the state general fund. So as charters increase, and I'm a school choice guy, I don't have a problem with that, but as charters increase, that puts more pressure on the state general fund. And another issue that somebody pointed out to me the other day that I really never thought of, school districts have to face voters. When you set your tax rate every year, you have voters that want to talk to you about why you're raising that tax rate or why you did what you did with that tax rate. Charter schools never face the voters, ladies and gentlemen, because they don't have any voters. They don't have a geographical area. So citizens don't get mad at charter schools like they do with district schools because you're raising their taxes. They see you differently than they see charters. And we have charter folks in this room. I think people know I have a foot firmly planted in both of those worlds. And I wouldn't have it any other way, but they're different. And we need to understand they're different. Now, I'm a conservative Republican, I always have been, I likely always will be, and I've never been a person who said, let's just throw more money at the problem. But the next issue deals with adequacy. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to argue that Arizona is not and has not in recent memory been adequately funding our schools. Our schools in 2008 were down 38%. We realized we had a problem in Arizona with the economy, the whole country did. Get it. We've had money added back here over the last couple of 3 years. Now most of our districts are down 30% over where they were in 2008. Now think about that. Let's take that into your home budget. So if I came to you and said, you need to cut 10% out of your budget, you'd be able to find a way to do that. All right, we don't really need 5 cell phones. Maybe we can get by with 3. Maybe we don't need to eat out every other night. Maybe we can eat out one night a month. I mean, you could cut 10% probably without a problem. So the next year we come back to you and say, now you need to cut another 10%. Now maybe you're going to have to get rid of a car. Or maybe you're not going to be able to pay that college bill. And you could cut 10% probably pretty easily. You could have a little more difficulty with 20%. If we come back to you now in year 3 and say we want you to cut another 10%, now you're probably talking about things like, do I go to the doctor or don't I? Do I pay the utility bill or the house payment? Or do I get another job? It has fundamentally changed your life, and that's exactly what's happened with districts and charters. Folks, you don't cut 30% out of something that goes back to 08, assuming 08 was adequately funding. And I'm going to argue that we have kids graduating from high school this year in Arizona that have never, ever been in a fully funded classroom, and I'm talking to the young people. Your education is fundamentally flawed because of that reason. And can we really, as a society, tolerate that? Well, I'm not sure we can. So then, let's talk about why. I received a very interesting correspondence yesterday from state board staff wanting guidance on how are we going to deal with these appeals from public schools in Arizona who are arguing their letter grade because they're being honest and saying all of our math teachers and all of our English teachers for the last 3 years have been long-term subs. They're not certified in English or math. They're doing the best they can. And our kids and their scores are suffering as a result of it. And those are the kinds of decisions the state board's going to have to make here really, really quickly. Why in the world would school districts, why should they even have to argue that type of issue? Well, because we have a problem recruiting and retaining teachers. We know that finances is part of it. It's not all of it. It's not nearly all of it, but it certainly is part of it. So we're competing against ourselves. So I was going to go all the way around the state. I didn't quite get there. So I started in California. In Arizona, the average teacher salary is $49,885. Let's round it off to $50,000. Okay, that's the average. California's average is $69,300. So if I'm in Bullhead City, all I have to do is go to Laughlin, and I'm going to get a $10,000 raise. If I'm in Yuma, all I have to do is cross the river to San Pasquale, and I'm going to get a $10,000 raise. Or move from Prescott to someplace in California. Nevada, $56,000. So about an $8,000 raise just to go to Nevada. And I'm sure that's similar if we look at other states. We don't even have to leave the state of Arizona for that to happen. If you teach at a school in the southern part of this county, you're within 15 minutes of school districts, Deer Valley, Paradise Valley, and Peoria. And you're going to get someplace between an $11,000 and a $14,000 pay raise by leaving Mayer and going to Anthem. You still live in Mayor if you want. It's not that far of a drive. And those districts who have overrides will always be at an advantage over those who don't. It's just that simple. And if they have bonds, they will always be an advantage. Do you realize we lose 24% of our first-year teachers in year one, and we lose 20% of our second-year teachers in year two? How many industries lose 44% of their staff, their key staff, their most important staff, in the first 2 years, and we think that industry is going to be successful? Folks, the data is on our side. We just need to learn from it. So here's the key to what I think I need to tell you. The question here today is all about political will. What political will does the governor of Arizona have, and what political will does the majority of the legislature have, and what political will do you have? What are you willing to do? We know what they're willing to do. I like the governor. He and I get along pretty well most of the time. And I've been privileged to serve for the last 3 in some capacity. But it's really interesting when you talk about adequacy with members of the legislature or the governor's staff, because their vision is very different than mine. Their view of what adequacy means is different than what I heard in this room this morning. Because when you talk to a state legislator or you talk to the governor, they are completely dedicated to education. They'll move as much money as they possibly can from their current revenues to support education. The governor did that last year. All of that money came from someplace else in the state budget to education. And that's adequate because that's what I can do right now. Now, your definition of adequacy and mine are a little bit different. Our definition is we want to have the best education possible for our kids. We need to provide whatever those needs might be. So we're not on the same page. It's just that simple. So I don't know that I have all the answers. I've got lots and lots of questions. I know that Dick Foreman, who's going to follow me here momentarily, has some really interesting ideas, and I think we need to listen very carefully. But if we have time, I'll be happy to take any questions, and she's the timekeeper, so she tells me when I'm done.
He's got about 5 minutes yet, so we've got some time for questions.
All the facts and figures that you've given and all the facts and figures that were on those slides, does the governor and all the legislature know those figures? Of course they do. They choose to ignore them.
Appreciate
Is that a
it.
question?
No, I will just appreciate that comment. Let me tell you a conversation that I had with Steve Pearson. Steve and I are good friends. I used to give him a dollar amount per student, and he always gave me one that was about $5,000 or $6,000 higher than that. And finally, we just went and sat down over a cup of coffee, and I said, "You need to explain that to me. I mean, the numbers you're using are no place close." And he says, "No, the numbers you're using are no place close." And I said, "Well, explain to me." My numbers are all M&O and all capital from every state. And he said, "Yeah, but that's not all there is to it. You got to put in all those federal dollars. You got to put in all those tax credits. You got to put in impact aid. You got to add those overrides, those bonds, put in your forest fee money, secure rural schools, PIL. Just keep putting all that in there. And now it's not 5,000 anymore. It's 11,000. Well, okay, that's a different way of thinking about it." And then I shared with him that that's not the way the rest of the country looks at it. When they compare these things, they're looking at M&O and capital. Well, that's not the way the legislature looks at it. So your point is very well taken.
So, Tim, can you tell us what effect you think the empowerment scholarships might have on what's ahead?
First of all, it's a great question, and I don't honestly know. We've had empowerment scholarships now for several years. They really started with handicapped students through special ed, and that was a pretty easy sell at the legislature. And then, of course, we've added military folks. We've added Native American reservations. We've added, and now, effectively, it's universal If that cap comes off, I think over time, again, 15 to 20 years, it could have a dramatic impact. Plus, there's two other things that we need to talk about kind of along that same line, a little different. Folks, we're facing two budgetary cliffs that nobody's mentioned yet this morning. I know Dick's going to talk about it. But we've got two budgetary cliffs coming. Prop 301 is a big one. And if Prop 301 doesn't get renewed in some form, you think we have problems today? Well, that's when we'll really have problems. I mean, they don't have a large enough number to say we're 59 or whatever that number is. So I'm very hopeful that that's going to be dealt with. I just don't know how. And of course, Prop 123 is the same issue. So probably time for maybe one more.
Do you guys look at, like, as the internet and everything and Wi-Fi has become such a necessity inside of the world and such a need, do you guys look at that as a necessity in the schools or just as an add-on, like sports and stuff like that?
Well, I'm not sure who you guys are. This young man right here with the Yavapai County Education Technology gets kudos for that because he's the one who gave the presentation to the governor's office. So I think that we've got something coming that will be very, very innovative and productive. But no, I think people realize how valuable it is. It is the way of the future. I mean, technology is not going to go away. We're going to have more. We're not going to have less. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Anything I can do